it was such a delight connecting with you after the last presentation I did, and having an opportunity to learn, a little bit about your story, as well as the great work that Waltz is doing, not only in this local area. So if you're on the presentation or participating on the Zoom call today and you're not familiar with this local area, we're in the upstate of South Carolina, but I think it's absolutely phenomenal that Susan and the mission of the organization that she founded has grown globally. And, when she asked if I would be willing to speak to her group, and I was certainly excited and honored that she would ask. So anything that I can do to help share some of, I've heard the story before, your mess is your message. So I went through a little bit of a mess myself. And so I would love to share that message with others that if it may help them not go through some of the same challenges that I went through, but also to help organizations be successful. Just to tell you a little bit of background or history about myself, I was in the HR profession for 25 years. And very successful by most people in this area, anyway, by most people's standard. I had a very successful career. As Susan mentioned, I had received awards both for my company and the great work that we did. And I was honored to be a part of that great work, but also personally or professionally. I was recognized back in 2017 as the South Carolina HR Professional of the Year from the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce and the South Carolina SHRM State Council. So, that was, looking back, certainly one of the highlights of my career, in that it gave me that sense that all that I had been working towards through the years had paid off and was being recognized by others. And one of the reasons being is because they didn't look so much at just me, but also the things that my organization had accomplished. And I always have taken great pride in helping others reach their full potential, not only our employees reach their full potential, but also my workplace. If you're familiar with SHRM, which is the Society of Human Resource Management, they have a slogan now, or a tagline. It's better workplaces, better world. And that is the thing that I've always enjoyed most about being an HR professional, because I felt like I could make a positive impact, not only in the lives of our employees, but our employees were able to then take that feeling of worth home, and when they were having dinner with their family, the conversations were much more enjoyable because they felt good about what they did, because most people spend more time at work than they even do with their family. So, if someone's experience in the workplace is miserable, then it's hard for them to separate that from their family life. And certainly, if someone has a very fulfilled family life, work life, and family life that spreads within their community, they're doing good works within their community. And so I truly do believe in the SHRM tagline, better workplaces, better world, because our world is made up of those communities. So this topic is very passionate for me, because again, back in 2019, I went through a period of time where you take someone who's already a workaholic, working way too many hours, and you expand their responsibility, which is what happened to me. My company went through a change of ownership, and I went from working 10, 12-hour days, but having my free time on the weekends, most weekends, a lot of flexibility to spend time with my family and friends. So I went from that to my excessive hours became more excessive, and those 10 and 12 hours days became 14, 16-hour days, and my weekends were consumed with thoughts of work. So I had no boundaries any longer. And after about probably 9 months in that role, 6 to 9 months, I started experiencing, or I recognized, I should say, what was happening. And I think it's the classic definition of burnout, which is why I started educating myself so that I could help share that knowledge with my colleagues and also others who may be impacted or affected by burnout. So that's what landed me here today. The burnout crisis in today's workplace. And from what I'm reading, this is not just affecting those here in the United States, but it is truly a global crisis that we're in right now. And I want to talk about the causes, the impact, and give some tips for prevention of burnout, but both at an individual level and as an organization or company level. But I want this to be very interactive. And so, please use the chat feature, speak up if you've got questions or something you would like to share as we go through this presentation today. So again, my name is Robyn Knox. I can't remember if I even shared that. And after 25 years in HR, I gave you a little bit of my backstory, but after about 25 years in HR, I did decide that I needed to do something different. And so after months of decompression, I finally decided that the right thing for me, I found my love of HR again. And the right thing for me was to start my own business and tap into that entrepreneurial spirit. So I now have a business called the HR Business Connect, in which I help companies connect their people strategy to their business strategy. I feel like that's the way that I can live out my purpose and my why and my passion, which is to help individuals and businesses or companies reach their full potential. So that's a little bit about who I am, or probably way too much about who I am. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to now accomplish, I hope to accomplish during today's session. So if I can get over to the right slide, and hopefully it's advancing on your side.
Yes.
Okay, great. Fantastic. So the agenda for today, I want to define the differences between burnout and stress. A lot of us, or most of us, have some degree of stress in our life. So I want to, at a very high level, explain some of the differences of how you can maybe recognize when it's shifting from just typical workplace stress over to the burnout classification or category. We'll talk about causes, as I mentioned, but also the impact that it not only has at an individual level, but our workplaces as well. And then some prevention tips for individuals and employers. And I would really love to have everyone share anything that you feel like when we get to that point that maybe has worked for you or you've seen work for others. And so again, prevention from an individual level and an employer level. And then we're going to talk about the recovery process. So if you have experienced burnout, how do you begin to recover from that? So I thought we would start by me sharing a little bit about what burnout truly is. So in 2019, the World Health Organization finally included burnout in its international classification of diseases. Now, people have been talking about burnout and using the term burnout back, I think, as far as 1970s. So it's not a new topic or a new term, but it hasn't been recognized with a full definition from a health organization. So you may be familiar with WHO, the World Health Organization, and the way they define it is it's a syndrome, and it's conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. And it's usually characterized by 3 dimensions. One being that level of exhaustion, cynicism, and then inefficacy. So when it comes to exhaustion, what do I mean by that? Because that's something that we typically think of when we think of workplace stress. You know, you may say, oh, I just need a nap, or I just need a vacation. But this is truly a feeling of energy depletion that you've had. And, you know, if you have had prolonged stress in the workplace, you know, your response may have gone from high energy, you know, Monday through Friday to, say, crashing on the weekend. You know, that is a level of exhaustion. But when it becomes real chronic, it's generally when you have those thoughts of, do I even want to go back into work? You know, you're dreading, you know, the work day, Monday. If it's the weekend, you're dreading Monday. You have fatigue and trouble sleeping, and all the physical problems start. So that comes about through exhaustion. What I mean by cynicism is that increased mental distance that you may have from your job. It could be feelings of negativity towards the workplace, the company, or even people that you work with. And so I don't know if you've heard the song, Take This Job and Shove It by Johnny Paycheck, many years ago. But that's what I think of when I think of somebody reaching that level of cynicism. It's like where you feel like you could just, with one more thing happen, one more bad experience, then you could walk out of the workplace without giving a notice, without having any income or any idea of what you're going to do next, that it has reached that point. So that's what I think of when it comes to cynicism. From an inefficacy standpoint, that term is used to describe our personal feelings of accomplishment. You know, and I can share with you a story here in terms of my inefficacy. And as I mentioned at the beginning, you know, I had always felt pretty good about my accomplishments in the world of HR. You know, I had progressed up to the level of vice president of HR. So I was head of HR for an organization, a smaller organization. And then I moved to another organization where I was the head of HR for their manufacturing division. And that company total had about 16,000 employees. And we had 1,000 employees that I was responsible for across manufacturing. Well recognized amongst my local peer group, had been involved in HR organizations, was the chair of different boards. So I truly did feel really good about all that I had accomplished throughout my career. Won the award back in 2017. And it went from that, someone who had always had a good bit of confidence, to a point where I questioned whether HR was the right career for me any longer. That I started doubting my abilities to be effective in the world of HR. I started questioning, you know, did I really deserve that recognition? You know, how could I help my organization? Why me? You may have heard the term imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome kicked in, and I started questioning and doubting myself. No longer trusted my abilities. So that is almost a clear definition of inefficacy. You start questioning your personal feelings of accomplishment. So that's a tough place to be in. And but I want to talk, and we'll talk more about that and how you can avoid those types of feelings as we go through the presentation. But I did want to clarify before we start with some dialogue and discussion as a group, the difference between stress and burnout. So stress is often characterized by overengagement. You know, some of us really thrive. I always took pride in the fact that I thought I thrived under stress and pressure, that my work was better, that what I delivered was better. And that went on for about 25 years. So I probably would have characterized myself as having a high degree of stress, but I was able to manage it. And we'll talk about ways that you can manage it later on and prevent it again from going over to burnout. But burnout, when it shifts, it's really then characterized by no longer over-engagement, but disengagement. You start avoiding making difficult decisions, or you avoid being around those people that you feel are pulling you down or draining you of your energy. You start feeling differently about the organization. Being in HR, I've always felt like HR has to or should be the cheerleader for the company they work for. And if you can't be that cheerleader as an HR professional, then it's time for you to move on to a different organization. And so I associate being a cheerleader with engagement. If I'm no longer a cheerleader, then I'm moving down that path of disengagement. So stress, also emotions. When you're under a stressful environment, emotions can be overactive. You know, it's like you're having a conversation with an employee, or in my case, having a conversation with an employee, and I would get so ingrained that I would feel for what they were going through. That empathy was in overdrive. But then as burnout kicked in, it's almost like my emotions became more blunted. Again, I started questioning, is this even the right profession for me anymore if I can't feel that same level of empathy that I've always felt in my career? Stress can produce urgency and hyperactivity, you know, like you're cramming for a big exam, or you're working nonstop on a project, but then you're going to feel that sense of accomplishment once that project is over. But there's that sense of urgency. I've got to get it done. You get in that flow state. Burnout, though, produces helplessness and hopelessness. So again, no longer are you feeling the need. It's like, I could work on this forever and it's not going to be good enough. Stress, loss of energy, you're tired, versus burnout, which is that loss of motivation. You lose those ideals, and in some cases, you even lose hope. And stress, it could lead to anxiety disorders. Again, some people manage stress well, some people don't manage stress well. But when it's burnout, it could lead to even more serious health issues or mental health diagnoses, such as depression. The primary damage from being in a stressful situation for extended periods of time is more physical, takes a toll on your body. You know, I gained a lot of weight through the years, to the point that maybe you remember that commercial for some diet medication or supplement that talked about increased levels of cortisol. And, you know, if you carry additional weight around your belly, a tummy fat, then it could be that you're under stress and it's additional cortisol entering your body. And my daughter even said one time, she said, "Mommy, I think you need to order some of that. You have more cortisol in your body." And she was only like 4 or 5 at the time. So that should have been a wake-up call for me, but it was not. But when it shifts from that physical over to emotional, that is, or to burnout, the primary damage can be more emotional. And in my situation, it takes a lot longer to recover from that. It's not like you go on a diet, you sleep more, you know, get some rest, take a quick vacation. It takes a longer time to go through what I classified as my decompression. In stress, we all know that stress for extended periods of time may kill you prematurely versus burnout, which, again, people may question whether or not life is even worth living. Fortunately, it didn't get to that point for me because I took action. Had it continued, who knows, had I not walked away from my job, which is what I did. Basically, I turned in an 8-week notice, and gave a resignation, turned in an 8-week notice, and had a vision of laying on the beach somewhere for about 4 months to decompress. Of course, COVID happened, and which extended my decompression time because the beach is closed in this area. So let's talk. I've got a question for you on burnout. So as we go into this, in 2019, what percentage of full-time employees do you believe reported that they felt burned out at work, either very often or not always? They didn't answer this question as sometimes burned out, but very often or always burned out. So in the chat, if you don't mind typing what you believe that percentage was, 8%, 18%, or 28%. So I'm curious what you think. And Susan, if you don't mind helping me monitor that chat dialogue. So what is the guess? What guesses are we seeing?
Yeah, we have a 28. We have an 18. So no one's saying 8, but yeah.
Well, and that really doesn't surprise me, but now that I understand burnout a little bit more and I've gone through it myself, but I will tell you as an HR professional, when I saw this, and this again is pre-COVID percentages, I was a little shocked. I think had I gone through this presentation, 2-3 years ago, or created this 2 or 3 years ago, my guess would have been 8%. And I think that was from me being naive.
Yeah.
And always being optimistic. And so if you had told me that chances were that 28%, which is the right answer, 28% of my workforce was burned out, I would have been incredibly disappointed at myself as an HR leader in the organization, but for not have recognizing that, but and doing anything about it. But I would have really been surprised because, talking to our employees, I never would have guessed that many of them were experiencing signs of burnout. Stress, yes, but burnout, no. So this was a shocking, I think, percentage for me to see. And again,
it has such implications, right? I mean, it has such huge, this is huge implications for employers, when they really want to step back and think about like even things like presentism, which is a word that I was always saying wrong. I think I finally am saying it right, but
presenteeism.
Presenteeism. Oh, okay. Thank you. Now I have it.
Just think of absenteeism. So that's how
presenteeism. Okay.
You're not absent. You're
present. You should have heard how I said it before. So it was, I'll give myself that. Present.
Okay, well, we're only competitive. We should only be competitive with ourselves, right? So you're getting a little bit better. You're getting a little bit better each time.
I will admit I'm terrible with pronouncing things. I've always accepted it.
That's great. Well, and this percentage actually came from Gallup, and Gallup does a lot of research. They publish a lot of great information for leaders and organizations. And so again, the 28% was surprising, but they also had about 48% of the respondents say that they reported feeling burned out sometimes. And so again, that to me is if it's not addressed, then that 48% will shift over to that classification of burnout, which is very often and always, if you remember, it's one of those things that's uncontrollable at that point. You just can't deal with the stress as well. And so I want to go on to one more question, and this is related to the midst of COVID. So at the height of the pandemic, there was several studies done to gauge burnout. So I'm curious, in 2020, what percentage of full-time employees do you think reported being burned out at work? And if you don't mind, put this in the chat. So is that 36%, 56%, or 76%? And Susan, what are you seeing as the guesses?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you. I'm seeing 56, And let me see. Need one more ups and a 76. There we go.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, pretty good guesses there. It was actually 76%. And that I pulled that from an article by Catherine Meyer. She had written an article in HR Executive Magazine, and it's based on a December study here in the US. This isn't a global statistic, but here in the US, and it was done by a benefits provider called Spring Health. And so they identified 76% of employees that were surveyed. There's also been numerous other studies. There is a group called LimeAid, an organization, and LimeAid they had done surveys for a few years, and so they had surveyed their employees pre-COVID, and they found out that about 42% of their employees were burned out. But a few months later, after COVID hit, right in the midst of that, a pandemic, then that number or percentage of their employees had shot up to 72%. So again, that was specific to one company, even though the statistics, that Catherine Meyer and HR Executive had referred to was across the U.S.
That's awesome. Thanks for those. Thanks for the names of those studies too. I love having that. That's really powerful. It's so important. Yeah, thank you.
And you're welcome. But I do want to engage some discussion here. And Susan, I really appreciate you chiming in earlier. And, if our other attendees don't mind sharing, and either you can, put it in the chat or feel free to turn yourself off of mute and speak up. But I'm curious, what do you think causes burnout? What do y'all think may contribute to burnout and the rising percentage of burnout? And Susan, if you can help me monitor the chat as well, I would appreciate that. Any thoughts? And certainly we talked about COVID.
If I may,
yes,
rather than putting on the chat, I'm more comfortable
Wonderful.
talking.
Absolutely.
So I think there can be many reasons, but one of the a core which I feel is organizational culture, and if people feel being valued and respected, then they can adjust to the thick and thin. So, for example, COVID time, if the leadership sets the tone that you are valued, you are respected, if we are even decreasing the salaries or doing the layoff, it is because of this and this. So a clear communication and respect and the culture bringing the people first. If it is there, then you are engaging people. If it is not there, then people feel that why am I taking all this stress? And if I'm not valued, the work is not meaningful, I might as well shift.
Oh, you are absolutely spot on. And thank you for sharing that. Those are definitely some of the causes. And there's someone I'm going to talk about who does a lot of research on burnout here in just a moment. And I think you hit several of the causes that she would say based on her research. So thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I noticed in the chat as well that Shayla has shared too many expectations from the organization and not being valued as well. So great. Is there some...
Robyn, I was wondering with also, it seems like we're hearing a lot about the idea of when someone is at home, they're working even more hours as well, and so I was just wondering, was that also a factor with COVID because like they weren't turning it off kind of like, they just keep, because maybe they were used to, and also like those social aspects, even just, I suppose those interplayed as well, but.
Absolutely. And, that definitely contributed to the rise this last year, the shift to remote work. That was a significant change for a lot of individuals, certainly. And one of the things that people lost during that time were their boundaries. And I'm doing a presentation later this year with a psychotherapist. She's a clinical psychologist, and she talks about bookends. And I love that analogy because I related to that when I first heard her speak. You know, again, I've always worked really long hours myself, and I would even bring my work home occasionally. But for the most part, I preferred to stay in the office, and I had a pretty long commute, but my drive home from the workplace would be my wind down. You know, I could think through, process everything I'd accomplished or didn't accomplish. And then when I got home, I was able to separate myself from the workplace to my personal life and my family, and could go to sleep comfortably at night. So even though my day may have been long, or the hours that I work may have been long, I had a bookend. And one of the things people lost during COVID and so many people working from home is that there wasn't any separation between work and home for so many people. And so their hours became, in many cases, even longer, but they didn't shut off as easily had they had some kind of maybe even a commute to and from the workplace. So that's a good observation, Susan. So the Harvard Business Review published an article back in February, and it was titled Beyond Burnout. And it has a lot of great information. So if you want to learn more on this topic, I encourage you to look that up. But that article was published by Jennifer Moss, and it quoted research that had been going on for more than 30 years. And according to those burnout researchers, Christina Maslach, if you look her up on YouTube, you'll see a lot of like TED Talks and that she's done through the years on this topic. But she and Susan Jackson and Michael Leiter identified 6 main causes of burnout. So I thought we could talk about those. One being an unsustainable workload, and that's a little bit about what you were talking about, Susan. The number of hours people were actually putting in during COVID and working from home. So Gallup analytics show that the number of hours people work each day may not be as much of a factor on burnout than some of these others, the compilation of it all. So if you really enjoy the work that you do, like now when I'm working for myself and I'm building a business, I may have periods of stress and I may be working a lot of hours, but it's on something that I really, really enjoy. So, and I'm getting to sort of set the tone and control over what I'm working on. But when there are other factors present, maybe someone is not enjoying the work that they're doing, or they're not as don't have as much control over the work that they're doing, or there may be a mismatch in their values and skills, or the rewards, that recognition that they're getting for their effort, then in those cases, Gallup has proven that through their research that people who are working an average of 50 hours per week, that their degree of burnout risk increases significantly. And when someone is working more than 60 hours a week, then it's through the roof. So I do think that that has contributed to one of the reasons it's become more apparent to people that increased workload tied with some of the other things that were affected because of COVID has been a major contributor on what the spike in the numbers this last year. So a couple of other things that I wanted to share here that, and Susan, this goes back to what you're saying. These are statistics. It might be too much information, but according to the National Bureau of Economic Research, the average workday increased in 2020 by 49 minutes. So yes, people were working longer hours. According to Harvard Business School study, there was an 8.3% increase in emails being sent after business hours. So I've always been guilty of sending out emails. Could be late at night. Whenever I think of something, I'm like, oh, we need to focus on this. Had my cell phone, pulled up my email app and typed an email to other people in my organization or to my HR team. But I always tried to make it clear that they're not expected to act upon that, right? I'm not expecting anybody else to be checking their email at night, but it was one of those things, it's top of mind, I need to get it done. But during last year's, in the height of the pandemic, there was an increase for across the board of those emails being sent out. And according to the same study, there was a 13% increase in the number of meetings that people attended last year. Now, I don't know about you, but I have always dreaded meetings. Most people I knew felt like there were way too many meetings in the workplace, and we were trying to focus on having put in some guidelines in around meetings, and you didn't have time to go from one meeting to the next meeting. But last year we actually increased the number of meetings. So while, if you think about it, it really didn't make sense. I think businesses did recognize that there was a heightened degree of stress and we needed to take care of our workforce. So you did see that from an empathy standpoint. But yet we added more meetings to their day, which is a little insane if you think about it. Didn't make a lot of sense. So, and also one of the other areas, in addition to that workload, is that lack of control. And we talked about this briefly. Being in HR through the years, I've heard a lot of complaints, I should say, about management styles with the companies that I'd worked for. Does anybody want to guess what that management style is that most people complained about? Any guesses there? Well, it's micromanagement.
That's what I was going to say. I am not. I think, yeah, that's an awful feeling.
Well, it's crazy how we want to hire the best and the brightest for our open jobs. We want people who are very talented and who can take our organization forward to that next level. And, because we know the importance of hiring good talent, but yet we bring them into our organization and we don't allow them control over their own job. We put them with managers who hold them back instead of letting them blossom. So, but that was probably the number one complaint I would get. If somebody was complaining about their manager, it was because their manager was a micromanager and did not give them control over their work, told them every move to make. The other thing that causes burnout is that mismatched values and skills. So, maybe you're not doing work, if somebody's not doing the work that they're passionate about doing, or, the type of work just leaves them feeling that there's no meaning to it. So having a person in the right job for them and their skills and what they value is critical. I did a session on onboarding, and one of the points that I made was that a successful onboarding program should really start pre-boarding, and even back as far as writing the job description for the position that a company is hiring for. Because a lot of times people come into a job and they are expecting one thing, but in reality it's quite different. Or the interviewer gave them such a sales pitch trying to recruit them that they set up some really false expectations or a false narrative about the business and how people were treated. And going back to Rosina's comment, they maybe had explained the culture and only highlighted the great things about the culture. So when someone walked into the organization, there was a shock factor that hit in, and that person realized in short order that it wasn't the right company for them. But some people could afford to leave. Some people can't afford to leave. And those that stay may go through the feelings of burnout because there is that mismatched alignment. The other one is insufficient rewards for effort. So, most people think about only compensation and benefits when you talk about rewards, but really this could be the intangible stuff as well. People saying thank you, you're feeling like what you're doing day in and day out is appreciated or recognized by others. One thing I would have told you a couple of years ago or a few years ago that was rewarding for me in the workplace was that every hour of every day, I felt like I was accomplishing something. Whether someone told me that or not, because I could see the fruits of my labor, so to speak. But it also felt really good when someone said, oh, I went home and I told my family about this great thing that we did here, or this activity that we did, or this wellness program that we're doing, or somebody said, I just lost 30 pounds. I feel great. Never felt this one good in my life. And, those kind of things were so rewarding for me. And so it's not just about, the effort you put in and whether you're paid for that effort, but are you seeing the fruits of your labor? Or does the company make you feel appreciated for the things that you're doing? So, and one of the statistics I'll share with you here is going into that next bullet on perceived lack of fairness. If someone, I think it was Gallup again, that did a study a couple of years ago, and when they found out that when employees strongly agreed that they were often treated unfairly at work, then they were 2.3 times more likely to experience a high level of burnout. So perceived fairness in the workplace is another critical element of the causes. And that can be things like, all kinds of workplace issues, perceived biases, discrimination, is there favoritism, who's being promoted versus who isn't getting promoted. Are we applying our policies fairly and or consistently and fairly across the board? So the last one that I'll mention is lack of supportive community. And this could be not only your coworkers, the person you work for. It may be even vendors that you deal with on a day in and day out basis, or the network that you have for your profession even. So do you have that supportive community? There's a gentleman named Chris Hogan who talks about every person needs a friend, a cheerleader, a mentor, and a coach in their life. So, do you have those people in your life who are bringing you up, versus are you surrounded by people throughout the day who are negative, who are more toxic to your department or to the company? Okay, anything else that are there any other main causes of burnout that anyone would like to share? If so, feel free to speak up.
So I think within the organization, the negative competition, and the culture where it's a culture of silence. So you are, there is a fear of speaking out. At the same time, you are in a culture where you are fearful to speak up. So then there is a lot of boiling inside, which you are not necessarily speaking up, and your feelings and your organization, as you mentioned, lack of fairness. So you think that it's lack of fairness, whereas it could be the perception, and perception is important. And therefore, understanding where the perception is coming from is one thing, and the other thing is the negative competition. Either it's between the profession, between the genders, or so it can be vertical or horizontal?
Oh, that is a great observation. And, a lot of times we'll use that term, politics in the workplace, and what's going to be the consequences of you speaking up? Is it that you do have, like you said, you have that culture where that's valued because you're considered a key part of that organization and everyone's opinion matters? Or is it that it could negatively impact your future with that company, maybe because someone has a differing opinion than you have? And so, yeah, that is a great observation there. Culture, again, is so very important.
So, for example, during the COVID time, we are from a private sector, and then there is a government sector. So nurses who were frontline and doctors who were frontline, in the government sector, there were some rewards which were announced. Whereas in the private sector, we took the salary cut. So nurses kind of felt that though we all are working more hours, we are putting ourselves to risk, families to risk, we are frontline workers, and some are getting more remuneration and rewards and awards versus the others are getting a salary cut.
Oh, so yeah, that crossed over a few of these then. So that perceived lack of fairness, right?
Yes.
Definitely fell into that. And insufficient rewards for the effort that people felt like they were putting in too. And I would imagine that one of the things that happens when folks start recognizing that and they decide that a company is not for them, then you start experiencing higher turnover as an organization. And then people are having to work even harder, right, to cover for those who have exited the organization. Yeah. And that happened a lot last year, at least here in our local.
For example, within the university environment, it was unsustainable workload in terms of the geographical hours, biological hours, and geographical boundaries, because if the leadership is in North America or Europe, and we are in the Pakistan time zone, so then there are different time zones. So the expectation is it's a Zoom meeting. Everybody will make sure that they are going beyond time zones and beyond boundaries of the geographical spheres, and therefore after work hours, what you were sharing, 13% more meetings and 8% after office hours emails. I'm sure if we see assess for our own organization, it will be even more, because if the campuses are in different geographical locations and if the leadership is in different geographical and homebound, then everybody is expecting that you will be available.
Well, and that is such a part of my story as well. When I mentioned my company went through a change of ownership. So, I had responsibilities for 1,000 employees right here, in this local South Carolina upstate area, across 2 manufacturing plants. When my role expanded, and I had always given my all, again, I worked way too many hours as it was. But then when my role expanded across 3 time zones, which is probably fewer time zones than what you're talking about there. But when my role expanded across just 3 time zones, and instead of everyone in my organization, a lot of people in my organization going home at the end of the normal work day in terms of office personnel around 5 p.m., which is when I typically started getting my work done. Prior to that, it was meetings and constant interruptions. And that's, but that I was in the role of HR. So that's the way it had always been. So I had learned any project work I got done was after everyone else went home. So hence, my work day was another 2 or 3 hours in many cases, or 4 hours even, depending on what I was in the thick of. But when things expanded across 3 time zones, then their work day didn't end until 7 o'clock, 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night. And so then I could get real work done, or project work done. And so if I was starting it at 8 o'clock at night, then yeah, it was 11 o'clock at night before I'd go home, or midnight sometimes. And, that's when it definitely was that unsustainable workload that you're talking about. And, but not only unsustainable across those 3 time zones, but they're from a end of day perspective, but it took away like what I used as a stress reliever, which was to leave for lunch during the day. Typical lunchtime here is around noon or 12 o'clock. So there weren't typically meetings scheduled from 12 to 1. Sometimes there were, but not often. So I would get that break in the day to re-energize and regroup. But when you're spread across time zones, there is no typical time break in the day, because that's the time that if you're in California, you want to schedule meetings at 9 a.m. in the morning, which was 12 o'clock our time. So, and I recognize now that could, what I had used as a way to regroup and re-energize then went away, so not only was I there late at night, but there was no break in the day.
So some of the consequences certainly is our trickle down effect to the group of people we work with, because it's less sleep, less food, or less oxygen, more digital work, more screen time, less exercise. And all of this is like causing physical and mental effects which are coming through. And on top of that, you keep hearing resources are constrained because the businesses are low. And therefore, the financial austerity measures keeps pushing the leadership to cut down on so many things. So it is then mismatch of your values versus your expectation being a leader with your colleagues and with your coworkers.
Oh, absolutely. And you really sort of are taking us into that next thing that we're going to talk about now. So, which is, what is that impact? I mean, you mentioned several ways that this manifests itself on, towards others or on others. And, we know from an earlier slide that, burnout is extremely serious or can be extremely serious if it's left untreated. So in extreme cases could even lead to thoughts of suicide. So I want to make sure that we do have a fairly complete list of what are those burnout symptoms, so that people can we can all recognize those potential signs. It's a great point. I mean, we do, I've been fortunate that I've worked for some really good leaders throughout my career. And I remember one of my CEOs, there were oftentimes I could just go to him and say, I think we need to do this and it's the right thing to do. And he would say, go for it. And there were, just do it, talk about having control. So, but there were other things that might take a little bit more convincing. And that's when you come forward with data. I had someone that I worked with one time, she used the baseball analogy, 3 times up at the plate, so 3 times if you strike out, then or take 3 approaches to it, then you're out if it doesn't work after that 3rd time. So I always tried, the first time I make an emotional plea, but the 2nd time I would always bring data, and the 3rd time I would, go all in and bring as much information as I possibly can. And then eventually, if it still didn't take, then I would just back off and fight another battle, so that I didn't live in that feeling of defeat mode. And, there would be something later on that would allow me maybe to take a different approach. But 3 times and I was out 3 times at that. So the other things that, and you mentioned this, Susan, absenteeism, according to Gallup, burned out employees are 63% more likely to take a sick day, lower productivity and poor performance, which manifests itself as what we call present, or comes from oftentimes presenteeism rather. And that's when someone is just mentally checked out. The annual cost to lost productivity due to presenteeism is $550 billion. Turnover, and I apologize, I don't know if that's a U.S. statistic or global, but my guess is that's U.S. And only U.S. Turnover, and more turnover breeds more turnover. And according to Gallup, burned out employees are 2.6 times as likely to be actively seeking a different job. Even if they stay, then they're 16% less confident in their own performance. And so if they don't have that level of confidence and we can't help them gain that level of confidence, then, that's going to bleed over to other people in the workforce as well. I saw a recent statistic that Microsoft did or published from one of their studies, and that showed like over 40% of people are actively looking for work, other employment. And that's even today. So disengagement is another one. Certainly energy and mental focus is just on the daily survival. So people aren't focused on the future or developing for the future. And if folks aren't focused on the future, then our organization likely is not going to be successful in the future. And then instead of creating a positive workplace culture, if you allow burnout to be pervasive in your organization, people are leaving, and you could be creating this culture of burn and churn, and that's going to affect your standing in the community. Whether people look at Glassdoor ratings or Indeed ratings, they're going to hear about your culture, and it is going to be extremely difficult for you to recruit others into open positions. So if you're burning and then churning, whether it's forced terminations or if it's resignations because people are burned out, it's not going to be good on your perception in the community. It can impact you in so many different ways, including making it difficult for you to recruit. And recruitment is probably talent acquisition is one of the primary objectives of every company I'm talking to right now is part of my business. And I ask, what is the focus for this year? We've got to get people in these open jobs. Recruiting is so important, but if we do not focus on retention of our employees, then we're going to continue to have that recruiting need, and it's going to be only more and more difficult. So, and please, again, if anybody else has anything they'd like to add, please chime in. But I know it's important for us to spend some time talking about prevention of burnout, not just all the causes and the impact, but now that if we can get our workplaces to recognize the importance of preventing burnout, what do we do? But I want to talk about prevention from two different perspectives. One's an individual perspective and the other is in the workplace. And then what can companies do? But first, individual. And the reason I want to do this is because if we don't take care of ourselves, then we're not going to be able to take care of others. And you may have heard, if you've ever traveled anywhere on a plane, they talk about the flight attendants say you need to put the oxygen mask on first, put it on you first so that then you can help others. Well, that's the way I want to approach this. And so this last year has been exceptionally difficult for everyone, not just first line responders, like we talked a little bit about, or medical professionals, but it's been difficult for everyone who've been juggling multiple responsibilities at work and at home. And as leaders, we do feel that enormous responsibility for those who work for us as well. So not only are we carrying our own baggage and stresses, but we're carrying that for those that work for us. So as an individual, things that we can do personally to help prevent burnout and our own burnout is we can recognize the warning signs, recharge, and then reverse that damage. I talked about ways that I used to recharge, like taking a lunch and, you know, eating, unfortunately, fattening food, but which is not what I would recommend, but breaking away from the stressors of the day. And then as an individual, we need to reset and we need to build some resistance. So I want to talk about some prevention tips that for individuals can take before we move on to talk about, you know, companies. So when it comes to recognizing the warning signs, you know, there are self-assessments that you can do. You know, one of the most highly recognized is this MBI, Maslach, and I mentioned her earlier, is doing a lot of research on the topic of burnout, but she has a burnout inventory, the Maslach burnout inventory, and it looks at the three dimensions that we covered earlier in the presentation, because the World Health Organization used her research, she and her colleagues, their research in defining burnout. And this MBI identifies 5 profiles in the workplace, you know, with an extreme of the spectrum being burnout. The other extreme being, hey, you're not at all burned out, you're actually highly engaged. But the other 3 are somewhat in between. So, you know, maybe you're not burned out, but you're overextended, or maybe you're just ineffective. Maybe you're in the wrong role for yourself. And then there's some people who are just plain disengaged for other reasons. So those are the various dimensions or the various profiles that that MBI would show. And when it comes to recharging and reversing the damage, yeah, there's mindfulness that you can do. There's, you know, that's gaining a better understanding, living in the present. But there's also self-care. And so I want to talk a little bit about self-care things that we can do. And then keep in mind, everyone's different. There's no one size fits all. And you have to find what works best for you. Now, I like to think of that using a cell phone battery or cell phone as a good illustration. So, and I mentioned how I used to, you know, regroup at lunchtime, you know, and handled stress that way. But, you know, there are some times when you just need 5 or 10 minutes, you know, maybe it's that deep breathing you need to do, or to get up and walk around, enjoy some sunshine. Just like your phone, occasionally, you know, it may drain, but it doesn't take but a quick charge, you know, to get you 40 or 50%. That's going to take you through for the next couple of hours at work on your cell phone, you know. So sometimes our own batteries a little bit like that. We just need that quick charge, like our cell phone. And so don't neglect that opportunity for a quick charge. Again, deep breathing, meditation, those types of things work wonderful. A little bit of exercise works wonderfully for that. Other times you may need a more full charge. You may need to, like, you plug your cell phone in overnight. So that could be a vacation. You know, you've got to take a vacation day. Some companies last year instituted what they call mental health days, recognizing that people need those breaks. Some companies even built in like a, you know, meeting-free day, you know, into their work week, so that people could get that break. So to me, that's more like a full charge. You know, maybe take a day off. Yeah. Other times you may need a complete reset. And you may need to take more time away. So you power your phone down, for example, and sometimes so it will work more efficiently for you, and then, you know, fully charge it after you powered it down. And, you know, that could be taking that week off. That could be it unplugging from your stressors in life, and enjoying your time away versus staying completely tied to the work via email and cell phones, which I've been guilty of my entire career, never fully disconnecting. So sometimes you need to do that as well to get that full reset. So what are some other ways, I'm curious, that y'all have found helpful? Susan, you have anything that you
Yeah,
have
well,
found?
sometimes I like will take a walk. Like I would just get out and walk.
Yeah.
And I walk barefoot usually, which is a little bit unusual. But I walk barefoot, just kind of, um, and just to kind of break away because I find myself in particular because I do soon I'll be working 2 jobs again. And I will be extremely busy. And when I hear self-care and things like that, I'm like, okay,
Have
you really
time.
need to do something, and
Yeah.
because I would find I would work and then work and I teach online, so and then I would do a lot of work online or presentation. And then I would end up on the couch just like staring. My boys used to call it slug mode. I'm
Oh,
just like
yeah.
they'd like kind of get their finger in, like poke at me. That's the word. And
Yeah.
I'd be
I
like,
love it.
oh. Even when I taught in brick and mortar, because I'd give it like 1,000%, I would come home and there would be nothing left, right?
Yeah, that's
So
how my
I'm
weekends
trying to
used
be a little
to.
more cognizant of that is not healthy, and just even walking a little bit and moving my body from this sitting position. And I know there's standing desks and things,
Mhm.
but just trying to make sure that even at our work, they actually encourage us to walk away for a few minutes every hour, just even every hour, just for a few minutes to and and I feel like this has actually changed over time because it used to feel like we couldn't miss a instant message or something, and I was afraid to leave my desk. I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm afraid to leave my desk. And they're recognizing this as well, as to get up, move around a little bit. You have to do that for your health as well. So I'm getting ready to begin again to work my second job, so or my
So you
full-time
definitely,
job or
so
whatever.
definitely
So
take time for
I
yourself,
am
right?
really trying to figure this one out, but yeah,
Okay.
it'll work. It all seems to continue to work out. So
Well, and a few other things. I mean, I think surrounding yourself with the right people, right? The
Mhm.
limiting contact with those
That's true.
negative individuals who may bring you down,
Mhm.
spending time for that 5 minutes of that you may have. Maybe you go and you speak to someone who always makes you feel good, that has that
Right.
smile on their face, and it's contagious, right? So yeah, the
Yeah,
people.
that's powerful. Being around someone positive, it really can change you. I know for myself, when I speak to some people just for even a few minutes, suddenly I like have this, because I enjoy, but both of my jobs I feel are like missions. And so it's like this resurgence of energy,
Yeah.
that like, wow, okay, I feel good now. Or, even just it's a reminder to anyone who's listening to this to send kind notes to people about what their coworker or friend or someone means to them. And you just don't know how much that can make their day, right? Because we know it makes our day. We laugh at teachers. We always talk about, being constructive, but also giving positive comments and things. And we say, we know that's true, but we forget too how much we love that. And I always try to say, yeah, it is important to the kids, because think about when you get observed or whatever in a business or place of work or wherever, and someone pays you, a compliment or notices something, just a friendly little note. What a difference you can make in your workspace and the life of a human being as well, right? Just these little tiny things that really they aren't taxing, and they actually make you feel good when you're writing them as well, right? So it's like a dual benefit.
Oh, I love that, Susan. I mean, yes, you've inspired me now to do more of that. But you are right; you're definitely spot on. I know when I would get notes from our employees, thank you notes for various things, I would tape them around my computer monitor, or I had a cork board in my office at one point. And anytime needed, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I realize it now, I referred to one of the reasons I did that was because I would look at those
Yeah.
throughout the
Hmm.
day or throughout the week. So anytime I was feeling that drain of energy, then I would look and see that positivity coming from our employees saying thank you,
Yeah,
and
and it
telling
just
me it's
makes
worth it. Worth
yeah,
it.
like you feel as if your job is important.
Yeah.
Any notes I've ever gotten, I have every note I've ever received from a parent or student of thanks. and my son would have them taped all around on his, literally taped on his wall, it's powerful stuff, and it's really free. It's a few moments of somebody's time,
It
and
really
I think
is.
that we oftentimes look at all these big programs and different things in companies or small, schools, whatever, nonprofits, whatever we're talking about, but sometimes just these simple little things are, those are the big things, right? Those are the things that make you cry for a minute and then regroup. Like, just when I always would say, like, I write them back too. That's an important thing,
Yeah.
to write back. And I think that's another thing maybe sometimes people don't think about, like, that you have no idea how badly I needed to hear that today. Like, you have made, my month, and
That is
it's with
great.
all sincerity. And I usually cry when I get them. And so I think that if we just need to remember, we're all human beings and we have these feelings, and what means something to us will mean things to others as well,
So I have an action item for myself coming out of today's session, and that is to write more notes. So I love that. Thank you.
Good.
One other thing that I would recommend, and again, I learned from my mistakes through the years, and that's to take your vacation time. Take your time off. According to the U.S. Travel Association, Americans forfeited 33% of their time off last year, which surprised me because previous years, I've always been so guilty of doing that myself. But it was for the right reasons. I wanted my team to get their time in, that kind of thing. But also because I was a workaholic. But I do feel like even in the height of what I was going through in a very stressful and situation where I was working too many hours, had I taken appropriate time off throughout that, I do think I would have been more successful, or at least felt more successful. So encourage you to do that. Evaluating your priorities, what's most important to you in life, setting boundaries, like we talked about earlier, bookends, however you want to refer to that, taking that break from technology, having that relaxation time that's in your happy place or with the people that fuel you, like we talked about. And I wish I had known earlier in my life the importance of sleep, getting the appropriate amount of sleep. After I quit my job, I started sleeping better at night, started eating better, wasn't under the stress, and the weight fell off. I lost like 35 pounds. But I think a lot of it is that combination is taking care of yourself.
Yes.
Or myself, what impacted me, and just breathe, and making exercise a priority. Those are some other tips I would recommend for individuals. But I also want to give tips for the workplace, certainly, because I think it's important for us. I mean, Susan talked about how we can, as an individual, regardless of our role, how we can maybe make someone's day a little bit better. But, as an organization, we have a responsibility as companies to not put the onus on the employees for their burnout and what they can do, but we need to, as an organization, take responsibility. So these are the 3 Ds that I'm calling them. We have the 3 Rs for individuals, but the 3 Ds for organization. And this is diagnose the issues that's causing burnout within your company. Develop and equip your managers and leaders to recognize the warning signs and how to respond effectively to those, and design a culture of well-being that extends throughout the entire employee life cycle, not just when someone is demonstrating or showing signs of burnout. And so if you talk about how we can explore this a little bit further, and I know we're way over time, so I probably need to just hit these highlights here, but a few things that I wanted to mention is, again, when you're diagnosing causes of burnout, tie it back to those, or diagnosing burnout within your organization, tie it back to those 6 factors or 6 causes that we talked about earlier, and assess how your organization is doing in those 6 areas. And if your organization already does like an annual engagement survey or job satisfaction survey, chances are you've got the data to look at. You may have never looked at it through the context of whether your employees are exhibiting signs of burnout or are at risk for burnout, you probably have just looked at it to get that percentage of, satisfaction. But look at it through this lens, and evaluate each of those causes carefully. Even doing things like stay interviews can help you diagnose. If you're experiencing more turnover, one of the things we did at my last company is we were seeing a lot of turnover early on in someone's employment. Then we started doing stay interviews. So, after 45 days, let's sit down and talk with the person. What do they like best? What do they like least? How can we make things better for them? So that's what I would consider a stay interview. Don't wait till someone leaves your organization and do an exit interview, even though the feedback you could get from an exit interview could be beneficial as well. Do it earlier on. When I mentioned developing and equipping your managers and leaders to recognize those warning signs, Susan had made me aware of something that I had no idea even existed, and that was the mental health first aid certification program. Love that. I think that is needed in every company, and so I'm going to be a huge proponent of that. Have already started sharing that information with others because I can see how that will be so beneficial, giving the managers the tools they need to be successful, or giving anyone in the organization, but certainly your managers, to recognize signs of burnout and what to do, recognize signs of other mental health issues. But the training goes even beyond that. You've got to develop and design that whole culture of well-being. And sometimes you need more manager training. They need to be effective leaders. If they're micromanagers, then you're going to lose somebody from your organization. If they're toxic, you need to get rid of them. But you need to address that because if they're toxic to your organization, oftentimes training is not going to do it for you. But train your employees where you can. Help them become supportive leaders. Help them become coaches so that they know how to help their employees develop and feel their worth within the company. Talk to them about their career goals as well. I think that's like in the top 3 reasons somebody leaves their job during the first year of employment, even in the first 90 days, is because they don't see that clear career path for them there. And you think within the first year or within the first 90 days, but it is generally at the top of the list. I think it's right behind like work-life balance. So all that ties in together. Think about, when you're designing that culture, your policies and practices that you have in place. Remember, fairness is one of the main causes that perceived lack of fairness. So, but you really should look at all of your policies and your practices. The thing I mentioned earlier that I was guilty of was sending emails late at night, to my team. Well, just telling them, I don't expect you to respond, is not good enough. I really shouldn't have been sending emails out late at night because I'm setting an expectation. People model typically the behaviors of their people that they work for or with. So, I didn't want my team modeling that same behavior. So I have regrets over that. What kind of leader was I doing that? I should have taken better responsibilities. So, have a check in with your managers, see what their practices are, because again, that's going to set the tone and the culture of the organization. What types of things are you as an organization rewarding or recognizing? Are you recognizing and rewarding those people who are in the office late at night, just putting forth the hours and hours and hours? Is that the type of thing that you're rewarding and recognizing versus someone who may be efficient in what they do and can work a normal work week? People have control over what you're rewarding and recognizing them for. If you're recognizing someone or rewarding someone on, maybe company-wide objectives, but they feel like they have very little control over things like the final sales, for the organization, sales dollars or revenue dollars. then they're not going to be as tied to it. So if it's something they have control over within their department or personally, then they're going to, again, feel like their rewards and recognition that they're getting is more tied to the effort they're putting in. So give them more control over things like that. I highly recommend, I'm a proponent of revamping or investing in your onboarding process. And I mentioned that earlier. And onboarding is not a one-day orientation from HR. Onboarding should be owned by the managers and leaders in the organization. You are responsible for the success of the person that works for you. So you've got to make sure you're hiring employees for fit. Is that a job that is going to fuel them? Or is it a job that's going to drain them? And Patrick Lencioni, who's well known for, who's written some great leadership books, well known for healthy organizations and teamwork. Patrick Lencioni has a new assessment tool called Working Genius, very similar to like a Strength Finders. Everyone has certain strengths. You have your working genius. And if you need to spend the majority of your workday working within those types of things that you're really good at, that are your strengths, if you spend 80% of your day working in areas that maybe you don't like to do, or things that are maybe your weaknesses, then you're going to start feeling more miserable about what you're accomplishing. So again, have folks work in their strengths zones. So job fit's extremely important.
Yeah, that's so important, and two, it can keep them interested as well. And another point I wanted, like that they're really, find their strength. I mean, that's what you want to do, right? Play to your employee's strength, and don't have them do so much multitasking that they're unable to even focus in and hone in on what their power, or their, what they're able to contribute the most to the company, of maybe why you started to hire, you hired them to begin with. And the other thing I wanted to take note of is, I know this happens in all professions, that sometimes I have had an educational, background. So the idea of working so much oftentimes is rewarded, because oftentimes we would hear, it's all about the children. And so when you take that to heart, and, it is all about the children, but you can work so many hours that you do exhaust yourself, and you are rewarded for all these extra hours. You usually, oftentimes, are normally not paid in the teaching profession, and often other professions as well, if it's salaried and things. And I think that it's very easy, especially people who, want to try their best and things, they will keep continuing to take more and more on. And then there we come back to the equity issue and the burnout and things, because after a while, it's like, well, this really isn't equitable, right? Like, I'm doing twice as much as somebody else, and we're having the same paycheck, or even just, this isn't a healthy period, but it's I think oftentimes easy to do that, because certain things can be done, and there are these conscientious people, and my son was one of them. I am one of them, and dependent upon your mission, it can really greatly harm people who are really your best employees, right? The ones that are just really working so hard. I know my son was so brilliant, and so much of what we did is some of the multitasking type things, and all the things I wish I would have known. This is one reason why we started this organization. And this idea is so this is extremely important, just for the mental health and wellness, and just general health period of people, physical and mental, and happiness, right? And what I mean, like, we don't want people to feel stressed and anxious or depressed all the time, and we want to live this life that we have right here. And I think sometimes we kind of forget that, and we just get into this mode. And I'm hopeful that this COVID and things have kind of, at least they seem to have, opened that door, for these types of discussions to take place, because how can they not almost right now with, like some of
Absolutely.
those percentages, like 76% or 78% of the people are burned out, and we're seeing these mental health the studies of so much anxiety and things. So
Yeah. And I think one of the things,
information
and
is
that
very timely, and important.
yeah, one of the things that brings up too is the value of an employee assistance program within a company too. And so if the company is not offering that, that should be a change they would really consider making to their overall benefit package. And employee assistance programs who may be more well suited, I love the first aid certification, mental health first aid certification, but part of that is you may recognize, but then you can maybe recommend someone get additional treatment, right? Or help. And employee assistance programs are a great benefit for employees, but not only employees, but their family members. I used to tell our workforce, I said, if you've got a teenager who's struggling to find themselves, refer them to the employee assistance program, because most employee assistance programs are for anyone living in the household. And we know that, how one person in a household is feeling can affect everybody else in that household. And, going back to, what one of your missions is to, create that stigma-free zone, or I'm not sure zone is the right word, but so I do think, that is so important. And I wish I had the statistics, and I know I probably share way too much data anyway, but there was a statistic I saw not long ago about the, I think it was for millennials in particular, that the weight that it carried for their decision making in terms of what company they went to work for, the weight that they placed on companies that had a strong focus on mental health. And I need to find that statistic. But
yes, I would. Yes, pass that to me.
Okay, yeah, certainly. And I know I've got it in some of my research. And
sure, yeah.
But I loved when I saw that. I'm like, it used to be several years ago, candidates, particularly that millennial group, they would ask, what types of community programs do you have in place? How do you support the community? What's your footprint when it comes to being green? Carbon. That's kind of.
Do you have a ping pong table in your lobby in the in the workroom?
Yeah, no, I didn't get that one, but I did get a lot of questions about the company's philosophy on giving back and to the community and to the world at large. But now seeing that seems to have shifted even more, and it's like, do you take care of your employees and their whole self, including their mental
health?
So,
that's
so I think that's really wonderful. Important. So one other final thought that I would like to just put out there is that in addition to you don't want like as we talked about, mental health to be a taboo topic within your workforce, so you want to create that culture, but recognize there are people in your workforce that have a difficult time talking to others about stressors, and particularly if they're work stressors. And those are people who are in those leadership roles, like your CEO or your head of HR, where they feel like they carry the weight of the organizations on their shoulders. Just going back to the example I gave about, Chris Hogan saying everybody needs that cheerleader or a friend in their life, a mentor, but they also need a coach. And I think this is where having that external person, a third party who they can talk to confidentially about the things that are weighing them down that are work related, is so important, because if you're in that role, that head of, let's say the head of the organization, you need to shield others from some of the stressors you have. So you don't want to take that home to your family, but you need to talk about it with someone. So
that's a great point.
I do think that everyone at the top of the organization in those types of roles, that they would carry the weight of the employees on their shoulder, then they do need someone externally to speak with. So think about, employing those coaches or executive coaches, leadership coaches, whatever, professional coach, whatever that term is that you prefer. But some other company strategies is, a lot of companies have put in mental health days now. I think I mentioned that, or increasing the amount of vacation time, or having policies even that, you should disconnect when you're out, or ensuring that someone else is doing your work so that when you come back into the workplace that, you're not overwhelmed trying to get caught up, that you're putting in procedures now to have backups in place, and you need to unplug, and they may require you to unplug. And a lot of companies certainly require you to unplug if you're out on a disability type leave, but now they're starting to say that when you're on vacation as well. And I'd love for us to have more conversation about prevention tips. And again, I know we are like running way over, but I do want to say just a few things. If somebody is already experiencing burnout, is there hope? And I would say yes, there is, having been there. The first thing you need to do is recognize that you may need to seek professional assistance. I didn't recognize that need, but had I early on, but had I sought help, and then I do think I would have recovered more quickly from the burnout. And so recognize that you may need to seek professional assistance. Redefine what success means to you. I had to do some of this. I had to decide what was it I wanted out of the rest of my life. What did I want to be known for? I never stopped and spent enough time. My focus had always been on helping others, or helping the companies. But, success to a lot of people means job titles, or it may mean compensation level, that type of recognition, or some type of recognition. But at the end of the day, if you were, say, 65, 75, and you wrote a letter back to yourself, in 2021, what would you say that you're most proud of? What were the successes you had in life that meant the most to you? So redefine what that success looks like, and, rewrite your story. Edit your story. You do not have to stay in the environment that you are now. Mine got to that level of burnout that I had to totally rewrite my story, and I had to walk away in order to do that. But if you recognize it early on, and decide take that control over your life is what I would say. And that's what I mean by that one. So
those are wonderful. I love it. I love those tips. Yeah, that's actually a beautiful thing, to think about, actually, because sometimes we feel so stuck. We feel we can't make a change. And, I applaud you for getting out, because it's not easy. It is not easy to leave.
Yeah. Some people would say, why didn't you just apply for another job? Why didn't you just, move on to another company, start putting in your applications? But I think mine had reached that point where I couldn't even think clearly about what I wanted to do next. And, if somebody recognizes the signs earlier in the process, they can start taking those kind of actions.
Absolutely.
I waited, but I was such a loyalist, I made a commitment to the employees, I'm here for the long haul.
Right.
So
and you care, right? You cared. You were really, you were committed.
But I ignored myself.
And then they, and this is what happens. Then we lose these great, some of the best assets that we have, because we're not recognizing it within the company, or so I mean, it's
absolutely
something to be so
I do think it can separate an average company from a great company when companies start taking the steps needed to ensure their culture, their workplace is stigma-free, as you mentioned, burnout-free as well. So that's all I had that I wanted to share with the group today. And I know we've had a couple of folks, Susan, who had to jump off the call. Were there any questions in chat, though, that you think I needed to hit on or answer before we end today's session?
I think that right now we are good, but I would love for you to give us your information, for people who would like to contact you. If you could let us know that. And I don't know if you have a slide with that, or if it was
I Yeah, I certainly do. And this is my contact information. You know, I encourage anyone to reach out to me if I can be of any assistance. As I mentioned, I did start my own business where I focus on consulting, HR consulting, more in the talent optimization area, which is to ensure you've got the right people in the right seats and they're feeling inspired and engaged and so about their jobs that they're doing. So a lot of what I do is to help guide companies and work with those individuals who they have within their organization as a coach or to do some leadership development training for them.
Yeah,
So
I
those
can
are
see it's be so valuable, Robyn. You are a whiz at this. You know so much. You have so many years experience, and no wonder why you won that big award and things. And I'm glad that you are doing this consulting work now, because I think it will just help so many people. You know, having such depth and breadth of background, and also having a heart, right, and empathy and compassion for the workers as well, and understanding how it all interplays is rare, I think. So we're so grateful that you took the time to actually present for Waltz today. When I had seen you the first time, I was just thrilled that you said yes when I asked, because I was like, oh my gosh, we have got to have her on, because this is such an important topic, and so many things we know so many things, right? But the things that are so important to the quality of our life, and also just the operations of our business or whatever, you know, are so important, yet oftentimes they're neglected, or we're not even really aware of them. You know, we get into a mode and just, you know, so we really appreciate all these tips and all the information. So
oh,
again,
thank you so
thank you
much,
so much.
Susan.